cool. I just want to make sure we can still hear you.
I was on mute, yeah.
All right, sounds good. Well, let's get kicked off with Fumble Your IT Budget. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. I just want to preface with, we do have a Q&A button on the screen. So if at any time you guys have questions throughout the presentation or conversation, feel free to throw those in and we'll stop a little bit early and get these guys to answer some of your questions here. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First, I'll do our in-house speakers. We have Sal Marino here, Colby Coombs over here, and Aram, who is from Topspin Tech. Colby's from Westminster Tool, and Sal obviously is in-house for Charles IT. And then virtually we have Rachel Tyler from Dell, Cybersecurity Business Development Manager. So let me allow these guys to introduce a little bit more about themselves. Sal, you want to kick that off?
Yeah, absolutely. So appreciate that, Jack. I'm Sal from Charles IT. I'm our Director of Finance and Operations here. So for me internally, I am really focused on the budgeting side for Charles IT internally and all the different initiatives that we have going on. My role spans across procurement, people operations, some sales, all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, like my main responsibility is ensuring the financial stability of Charles IT for all of our employees and then also all of our clients. So with that being said, hand it to one of those clients.
So again, client, Westminster Tool. My name is Colby Coombs. I'm the CFO over at our facility. We're a complex injection mold builder for the plastics industry, medical, defense, aerospace. And when you look at these industries, cyber is always a point of contact, right? And you're working on budgets, you're working on the expenses. I've been in a situation where we've been burned in the past. So I really do appreciate working with someone like Charles IT and managing our IT services to make sure we're protected and also operate in the best way possible, improving efficiencies as well as security.
Awesome. My name is Aram. I'm the president of Topspin Tech. We're a technology consulting company specializing in cost reduction, technology efficiencies, and sourcing of those technologies. We work with Charles IT as a great partnership to help their clients make sure that their internet access and a couple other things, including potentially wireless, they're spending the right amount of money for the solution that's appropriate for the other services that Charles is supporting.
Awesome. Rachel?
Hi, everybody. Rachel Tyler. I work for Dell Technologies in the services department as a cybersecurity business development manager. I do have a background in technical cybersecurity, so I was in the Marine Corps for about 13 years. Worked my way up, from the bottom to a regional manager for the Marine Corps Enterprise West Network. And then I came over here to Dell about a couple years ago to work in our services section. Very nice to see everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. So with the introductions done, let's jump right into it. And I want to start off and ask you guys personally why you think IT and cybersecurity budgeting is so important for small to medium-sized businesses. So Sal, I know this is your specialty around here, so I'll let you kick that off and then pass it around.
Yeah, for sure. So for me, I think the planning for IT and cybersecurity is critically important to small businesses because at the end of the day, you need to be able to plan for these things. I think a lot of organizations try to pretend like they don't actually have the need for IT spend or even cybersecurity, where cybersecurity was a non-conversation, maybe 5-6 years ago, where some people were doing it, a lot of people weren't. And as we've continued to progress and we've seen a lot of the changes in the cyber landscape, you're starting to notice that it's become more of a forefront in the actual budgeting process, where you have a line item, in your budget for IT and the services and equipment, all the things that you might need, but you also are now starting to add a line item that is specific to cybersecurity and even potentially some compliance related things that all kind of roll back into IT. So that's what I'm seeing a lot, especially in our space, which is primarily small businesses, but I know that you have specific experience having to budget for it on the flip side.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Sal. It's not only my budgeting for, monthly recurring costs, different softwares I have to help with the manufacturing process, but when we have contracts with the DoD, we have a certain level of security we need to maintain. And as you budget your CapEx for machines to increase capacity, well, I budget CapEx and making sure we have the best computers to process this, to process our softwares better. I'm planning for that. The increase, inflation does not discriminate against software costs as well. So, planning for the increases and making sure that we're still maintaining our profitability levels, because this is a cost of running a business. Just like payroll, just like machine purchases, IT is on the top of my list and making sure that you're maintaining the forefront and we're being proactive rather than reactionary when a surprise expense or something else comes up.
Man, how do I follow that? You guys are so smooth. So I would say that if you're not budgeting for cybersecurity specifically, and or it's not part of your internal like overall IT budget, then you're probably doing yourself a little bit of a disservice. Only because we've seen in the ecosystem that security risks are at an all-time high, and they're not going to continue to go down, right? They're going to continue to go up, right? Like it's one of those things that. And if your business is hit with an unfortunate, breach or ransomware, something like that, like it's going to cost you way more to fix and resolve and that issue than it would be to prevent the headache altogether with, right? As well as could affect a company's like actual business, like long term. It could really affect like their sustainability if they get hit pretty hard. Part of what we do is try to find some of those things. So if you're not budgeting for the securities, like we look at what you're currently spending on certain aspects of your business and see if we can find some of that already spending budget that's happening right now, look to save money in one category so that you can go to Charles to help fund some of these things that they may be recommending for you.
Yeah, and I want to touch on something that you both said, but yours was more specific about it's something that I'm planning for and I know that I need. And that is something that a lot of small to mid-sized businesses are in the process of like transitioning their thought process into, right? Where we traditionally see IT as a necessary evil. Like I need to call the IT guys like to reset my password, or I know I'm going to need to do this. It's become less of the necessary evil thought process and more of like a strategic asset or an arm of the business that's helping, really on business enablement. And that is, I think, the big shift that we're seeing now, because more people are realizing they need it. And it's coming across in the different compliance worlds where like you've seen it in DFARS, you've seen it now, CMMC and all the different fund that they're putting out. And then we're now seeing it all the way down to cyber insurance, where people are getting flat out rejected by the carriers if they don't have something as basic as security awareness training or something like that.
Yeah.
To add some numbers to kind of contextualize what we're talking about, 47% of small and medium businesses are going to get hit by some sort of cyber attack. Those are the current statistics. Of that 40%, 60% of those businesses are out of business within 6 months. The cost and impact of a cyber attack is no longer kind of the cost of doing business, right? You can't budget for it. These ransoms that are being demanded, the cost of recovering all of your stuff after an attack is literally putting small and medium businesses out of business. They can't function anymore. So it's super important, very important, that you kind of gauge that risk out there for your specific business, right? Some industries are targeted a little bit more than others, but you gauge your risk and you budget appropriately. This needs to be built in to your business model, not something separate, not something on top of or an afterthought. It needs to be a part of your business model to stay in business in the future.
One of the things I would add to that, Rachel, you're saying that, 47% or I would almost argue that those are the ones that have been reported, right? Like those are the ones that are actually in. And I would say that, yes, I agree with specific verticals or maybe targeted a little bit more than others, but there's no discrimination going on with attackers, right? Like they're out there, and I hate to say it, but a lot of small businesses who aren't prepared for it may already have been breached. They just,
Mhm.
whoever's breached them just hasn't figured out how to monetize the information or the environment that they've gotten into, right? Like recently one of our clients found out they thought they were prepared, and the internal IT staff had said to us like, oh yeah, we don't need to talk to a company like Charles, or like we're all set. We have 6 internal IT staff and we have sonic walls and we're good. And
Yeah.
then we did kind of a risk assessment, and we found out that somebody was already in their network and every 15 minutes sending continuous pings to Iran. And we're like, oh, well, I guess your firewall didn't pick that up, right? Like, so they're finding also really creative ways to get in. And it's not really my specialty. Other people are smarter than me, but I would say like, sometimes they're getting in through like a camera, and then they're sending outbound traffic from a camera out, and then the firewall saying, well, we initiated this outbound traffic, so it's okay to let the next thing back in, right? So so as much as people are finding creative ways to get in, it's people like Charles IT's responsibility to help you make sure that doesn't happen, right? So it's really food for thought. Sorry.
Absolutely. No, you're 100% right. And that actually leads right into the next thing that I wanted to discuss. And it's scary. That's those creative ways to get in. And so, I mean, we see things like phishing, social engineering, more of a broad umbrella term, and ransomware. And it's like, how do you prioritize what exactly you are trying to defend against? What steps do you take in terms of, from the MSP perspective? Like what steps does Charles IT take? What steps do our clients realize that they need to patch? So what are the first steps there that you guys see anyway?
I mean, I would say there's a whole list of things that Charles IT could do for their clients. What they can't do is make sure that the employees are acting appropriately, right? Like, I think a lot of there's only so much that Charles can do, but the security awareness trainings and making sure that all of the employees understand the risks and the current and proper behaviors is almost as important, right? Like, so it's but if you don't have that strategy and that awareness training and the safeguards from a technical aspect in place, then you should probably call Sal.
Yeah, and it's 100% right, because everybody thinks that cybersecurity is a bunch of tools, and that is not cybersecurity. Like, those will help monitor, detect, and all that kind of stuff, but that's not cybersecurity. Like, it's the same way, like, it's interesting to think about how IT is so related on the finance side, because on the finance side, we talk about internal controls. That is the same conversation you should be having about cybersecurity and the practices within your organization, right? Like, there's simple things that you can do where it's like, I'm banning the ability to use the word password 1 as a password, right? Like, that is a cybersecurity measure, right? That is a way for you to be able to help protect your organization, is by, making sure that the password has to be more than 8 characters, or it has to be a phrase, right? So it's multiple words in a row, or there's a bunch of different things that you need to do internally before we even talk about tools. Because if everyone is using their own personal laptops, we're all using our own Gmail accounts, and there's no 2-factor on anything, and that's like our starting point, then we're having a very different conversation than us saying like, you need something like managed detection and response. Like, you don't need that. Like, you need to get all your machines joined to a domain. You need to have a centralized email solution that has best practices put in place. Like, that is really like the starting point for every organization, to make sure they have that stuff in place.
Yeah, I think in terms of budget, that's exactly where you start, right? You find out what you need to do, you build that roadmap, and then you start implementing things one step at a time. And so in terms of budgeting, how can we see small businesses keep on track in their budget and their spending there?
How are you handling it?
So I think that is, you got to look at your current state. And I think a lot of people are nervous to look what the current state is. Where are you right now? I hate to say, how bad do how bad are you actually, right? When we first started, I thought we were in a great position. And, when we performed an audit, we looked at really our practices on where they currently stand. And it's a little alarming on how far back you are. Technology is something that look at your iPhone, it evolves so quickly. And as fast as your phones and technology advance, that's how much you have to evolve your internal systems. But where does it start on it? The employees are number one. Just like a lot of things in this world, it comes to the people are the main problem causers. You can have the best firewall, the best systems, the best practices in place, but if you get a text that says, a phishing email says, "Hey, Colby is going to give you a $50,000 raise if you press this button," that's going to get someone in there. There's great things on a low hanging fruit that companies can immediately start budgeting for, like services like KnowBe4. These great platforms do employee training, and it's not only the training, it's making sure you're allocating time for your team members to go through that training. That's a requirement for not only onboarding, but a refresher, right? And that simple way right there is getting people, I hate to use the word a scare tactic, but people have to be aware of it. It's you have to be aware that people every single day are trying to get your information. And when you understand that, you always start with the people, and then you start looking at the best practices. Then you're making sure your computers and your hardware are the best, you're best suited to protect yourself, right? Giving those lines of defense, almost like an onion, right? Your people are your first part of the onion. You keep going in and in and in. That's where the true protection happens, making sure that you are not getting ransomware or phish, as the great word that everyone loves here.
That's the quote of the day. It's an onion.
Yeah.
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 No, it's good.
To
You
throw
mean
out
I'm not-
another stat on top of that, you guys, 40% of these ransomware attacks stem from what's an insider threat. That does not mean
Wow.
all of your employees are hackers and they're hacking away, right? It's uneducated employees or users clicking on phishing emails, going to McDonald's on their work laptop and getting on the free Wi-Fi, right? These behaviors, like they said, you can be as secure as you possibly can. If your employees or your user base isn't trained in proper cybersecurity mechanisms, that's a huge kind of threat vector that you have not addressed. And it's very important.
Yeah. And there's a lot of like real world examples that all of us have probably like fallen for. And I know me personally, I'm not afraid to say it. Like I have also failed our own internal KnowBe4 practices before. And we've had a bunch of our own technicians fail because some of the emails are really well crafted. And when you're talking about KnowBe4, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be like stock standard emails. And if those are getting people, imagine an actual like hacker that has more information. They're using that information to be able to create some sense of bias or urgency or something that's going to make you click on something. But I know for me personally, I had someone start in procurement, and she was the only person on the team that was in that role. And I happened to have something happen with one of my dogs. I had to leave the office. I'm in the middle of the appointment at the vet, and I'm like going through email because, again, she just started. She's by herself. And I get an email where it was from a random vendor saying like your invoice for, it was like $3,000, and it was for like furniture of some sort. And we had just talked about retooling our inventory room. And like the serendipitous amount of like time between those two things had me go click on it. And it was like, ha, gotcha. And I was like, I can't believe I fell for this. But like it happens all the time. Not every single phishing attack or attempt or anything like that is someone from Africa wanting to wire you money,
Right.
or
Your long lost cousin.
or please Colby sending me an email saying, please send me 10 gift cards and scratch off the back and send an email to me so I can use them. It doesn't always happen that way. So it's being aware that, it can happen in a bunch of different mediums.
I've seen a lot of that invoiced emails, by the way, recently. And to Rachel's point, public Wi-Fi is probably something that the general public that's not, call it in our space, probably uses more than they should. I would tell you, like, if you're on an unlimited cell phone plan, just use the hotspot on your own phone. right? Like, no need to do that. I would tell you that we've had, in my experience, I've had some other cybersecurity practice people mention that people always want to feel like a VIP, right? So if you go into, call it like the airport, and you're sitting in, let's call it Bradley Airport in Hartford, and Bradley has their own Wi-Fi there. If a bad guy wants to create a pineapple and put Bradley Airport Wi-Fi VIP, most of the people will try to get, and they see that it's open without a password. Most of the people will try to get on there, and all you're doing is opening up for a threat, right? Like, so it's that's a really long way of saying stop going on public Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, that just tells you how important it is for that security awareness training as that base step. If you're starting from ground zero as a small to medium-sized business, small business, whatever you may be, I think that's obviously one of the most important first steps to take there. So in terms of prioritization, are there any other services that you'd say are on that level with security awareness training? You know, like, this is the most bang for the buck. Like, you're gonna lock down your entire company, your organization, all your employees here just by doing these trainings every couple months or once a quarter or annually or whatever the case is. I mean, you're improving yourself. So are there any other of those base level services that you guys see as necessities for starting a budget?
Yeah, I think it's same way you deal with insurance. What is your biggest risk? Right. So you work backwards, and if you say that, hey, if I might lose revenue for 1 month by not having my systems working, or 1 week or 1 day, and you start realizing that dollar value is very, very high up there. You start realizing I could be losing $500,000 a month if I get locked out of my system. When you hear that $500,000 a month and you say, how much am I willing to pay in order to not have that work, right? Not have that happen to me, to mitigate that risk. And when you start going, I always work on people, a plan, and then a purpose, right? So again, the outer layer is the people, but when you're looking at a plan, is knowing that, hey, there are some reoccurring costs that we know we're going to incur, right? There are some one-time costs that we know we're going to incur. How do we start planning for that? Because I know that the basic simple, where do you start? Getting KnowBe4, or working with a management service provider to do a gap assessment to figure out where our greatest risks are. They might come back and say, hey, we need to redo everything here. And you say, okay, well, let's make a 3-year game plan, right? Let's work on this server first, right? And let's go a little bit at a time, because that's what we have to do. We can't do all things at once, because it would be a large lump sum, Sal, going in and paying to put it all in. So it has to be a roadmap. Yeah. And there are some costs that you need to plan for every single year. When you look at wires and cables, chargers, they go, you just have to have a small budget to make sure that you're capturing and planning for those. That way they're not caught off guard. And also so that you can manage internally how you're spending. If people are throwing their chargers left and right, or throwing in a machine, and we're overspending on chargers, that adds up a little bit, right? So starting with a small low hanging fruit, and then look at past history. What do you usually spend, right? Between your softwares, between your Microsoft suites, maybe, like, we're very lucky. We have a unbelievable on-site IT admin. Well, I know that he has a salary I have to pay for to making sure that we can get these services, right? So when you start looking at, these are fixed costs, meaning I know I'm going to have the software fees, even though they might raise up with inflation a little bit. I know I'm going to make sure I have Aram around our facility. I know we're going to have this training set up, which involves people time, meetings, training, and the service as well. Then the last is, what is a plan, right? And that's working with Charles IT, and that's working with Aram by saying, hey, I know that in 3 years we need to upgrade our server because we're growing at a pace where we need to process more speeds. I understand that computers age out very quickly. We have a rotating cost for sustainability by saying some years we'll replace engineering laptops. Other years we'll replace the front office laptops and computers. Yeah. So it's getting ahead of it and planning, making sure that you have a strategy to execute and you can plan accordingly. And I think you have to break down of what goes into an IT budget, and then making sure that you're guaranteed your fixed ones are in there, and then always have your nice to haves. If you're having a really good year, maybe it's a good year to replace and upgrade your server for some more protection. And that's really how we go about it, but we're very lucky. Always leverage on your resources. having Aaron to lead the guidance. I'm a finance guy. Sometimes you'll use some terminology that's Latin to me. So that we're very, very blessed that we have someone like Aaron on our team. But between Aaron and working with Charles IT, we have a roadmap and we follow that roadmap. And having that, I'll tell you what, is a great way to help me get some extra sleep at night, knowing we don't have a ransomware or a social engineering hack happen.
Yeah, definitely.
I love the idea of a roadmap. And I also love the idea of not consuming the elephant all with one bite, right? Like, and you don't have to implement. It would be a nice to have, right? Like to have unlimited resources and money to go out and do every single thing. But like you do have to prioritize things, and that's I would say. And selfishly, I'm going to say this along with my partnership with Charles IT is make sure that you have a full sense of your inventory of where you're spending your money and what you're spending it on. And a lot of companies, sometimes the call it the IT staff or the staff that made decisions towards IT or whatever are not necessarily talking to the finance people, right? And you'll find that they've ordered something and the financial people are just continuing to pay some random bill because it's coming in the door. I'll give you an example. We have a large car dealership in Connecticut that's a client of ours, and when we did our first inventory assessment, they had 5 different Comcast internet bills into one of their locations. They have multiple locations, but into one building they had 5 different Comcast bills. And they wouldn't have even known unless we did that sort of inventory of what they're spending and what their bills are, and gave them a current cost like operating like readout. And I turned to the owner and I said, "Hey, why do you have 5 in there?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know. I'll have to ask my IT company. By the way, not Charles IT customer." And I said, "Well, your IT company probably needs a refresher on why you don't just have the one fiber circuit and these 4 other coaxes in here, and they can, do they can do a mesh network and guest Wi-Fi and internal, and like you only really need 2 instead of 5, right? Like so." Let's have a conversation with your IT company and maybe move it over to Charles, by the way, right? And but unless we did that sort of inventory of every dollar from a technology standpoint of where you're spending it, they wouldn't have known. They would have just, for the next year, 2, potentially more, like they would have just continued to pay these bills. And now we found money for them to spend on projects. So it's found money that maybe currently is already being spent in your organization that you can repurpose for somebody that Charles may be recommending for you.
Yeah. And that's like it's a perfect conversation to have about like when you're talking about the budgeting process, because having an understanding of like the full scope of what you're about to go spend or do and what like the repercussions of that are. So most times when we go and talk to clients for the first time, we're like, okay, what is your plan for the year? And they're like, well, sometimes they have a detailed plan for the business, not just IT, but the business. Sometimes they don't even know how many people they are expecting to hire. But say you do have that plan, right? You're like, I'm going to hire 10 people this year. Do you know what that costs?
Yeah.
Right? Because if I add 10 people, right, I have new equipment, so laptop, dock, keyboard, mouse, monitor, you name it, for that employee. We just talked about $2,000, $2,500 right there.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's like they need an email license, they need the different security tools, like all of these different pieces. And you're like, okay, what is the like average cost of a user? And so every employee has a fixed cost, a monthly recurring cost. And then you have to understand, by bringing on these people, what else changes, right? Is it the resources that the server is utilizing? Is it my Wi-Fi only supports up to 50 people and now I'm at 60, right? So do I have to consider changing my networking? And so there's a lot of different things that go into that process, and it's having either a great internal team that understands like the budgeting process as well as like how it impacts the different areas of the business, or leveraging resources like us or like Aram and being able to kind of walk through that full scope of what's going to be impacted. Because the same conversation for you is if you have a 100 meg coax line to your business and you're running with 60 people, like you're in a bad place fast, right? And you need to be able to have those conversations ahead of time to know what that involves. And so on the IT side, I highly recommend like that being a huge part of your budgeting process. Like I'm doing it internally for us because we have our own IT, we have our own internal IT and our own spend that we have to do. And I'm budgeting for that. And we'll talk about, I'm assuming at some point, like, what does that look like? How much is that? But really having an understanding of that is one of the most critical things that you do during your budgeting process.
Now, as you're going into kind of budget and build that roadmap, right, starting from the bottom, now each business is different and each business is going to be met at a different time in their maturity process, right? But if we start from the bottom of kind of highest prioritization and working up your hardware, you need to have updated hardware with software on top of it, right? It's secure a Windows Vista machine. It's just not supported anymore. There's no patches. You have to have updated hardware with hardware security, and we can get into vendor supply chains if we have enough time later on this conversation. Hardware security. And then the next thing that you guys can do, a really good next-gen antivirus or endpoint detection response system on your endpoints that you just bought, right? And then after that, the next thing you guys can do is make sure you have some sort of boundary firewall, whether that's from your ISP or you've purchased a firewall and configured it yourself, right? Then we move over to managed services. Now I want to talk managed services as prioritization because first of all, it takes 5 full-time employees to run 24/7 operations in your network. Attackers know that most of us don't monitor our network 24/7. Most attacks happen over holidays and on weekends when none of us are there monitoring our things, right? So having that 24/7 monitoring of your environment is very important, but it is financially impossible for most companies out there to hire 5 full-time cybersecurity people to monitor their network, right? So then we talk about managed service as a cost-saving mechanism. In the managed services world, the 2 biggest risk reduction things that you can do, hands down, if you can do 2 things and nothing else, is vulnerability management. They mentioned a couple times like gap analysis or audits on your network. Vulnerability management is the continuous version of that, right? Scanning all of your stuff once a month for all of those vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities are how attackers get in. That's how they compromise your network. So being able to identify all of those vulnerabilities, prioritize them, and then fix them, that's the single biggest risk reduction thing you can do on your network, right? The most bang for your buck, if you will. Next thing on top of that, because AI, I don't even want to bite that off right now, but we need to be monitoring the weird anomalous behaviors on your network 24/7. That is called managed detection and response, usually with like an XDR or an EDR system. Those 2 managed services there are going to reduce the risk in your network to usually an acceptable level. Of course, we want the managed security awareness training. That's a must. You do your hardware, your firewall, right? Your next-gen antivirus. And then those are the 2 managed services that you should budget for and prioritize. So like they said, this can't all, well, some of you might be able to just rip off the Band-Aid and get it all at once, right? But if you were to build a roadmap, hey, I can do one thing at a time. I'm going to start with my hardware. Next, I'm going to move into like the security on that hardware, right? Next-gen antivirus and your firewall. Those 2 things can be kind of done in conjunction. And then you move on to vulnerability management and MDR. And then on top of that, if you got money to throw around for cybersecurity, you have all the modernization and the cool stuff that's going on now to just really secure your stuff, which I would propose for very at-risk companies. While all of you are at risk, there are those companies that have a lot of intellectual property, maybe have huge user bases with financial data, right? Those might be actual hard targets. It's not done on a sweep. You aren't targeted on a sweep. You are specifically targeted. You might need a little bit more robust cybersecurity mechanisms, right? But across the board, you do hardware security, you do your boundary, vulnerability management, and MDR. You're pretty secure. You've reduced risk enough.
Yeah, and if I can add two things to that.
Yeah.
The one thing that we haven't talked about, I'm surprised we've gone 37 minutes in this conversation and no one has said multi-factor authentication. Like
Yeah.
that is
yes.
like, it is one of the most like,
Yeah.
it's one of the
You're
easiest
right.
lightweight things for anybody to implement. And that is like one of my favorite sayings now is like multi-factor on everything, like as many
Yep.
things as potentially possible. Like I remember when I had my first daughter, she's 3 now. It was my first Father's Day, and I'm at the beach with her, like putting her feet into the water for like the first time ever. And it was such a cool moment that was completely destroyed by the fact that all of a sudden my watch started going ding, 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 ding. And it was my multi-factor push notifications to my watch that from our HR platform. So it has all the employees' bank accounts, social security, like all of that. And the good news is I had the multi-factor on. So somebody had my password and was trying to get in, but couldn't. And so the multi-factor saved me, but I did have to leave my daughter with my wife, not just by herself in the water, but with my wife, run back to the hotel and then start rotating a bunch of passwords and things. And that was a pain. But
Yeah.
that is like one of the most like easy things that you can do. If you're in Microsoft, there's a free way to do that. And if you are looking to like really take it to the next level, that's when you talk to us. We talk about Duo and how you can put that on as many things as possible to reduce the risk of somebody gaining access to your credentials. The other thing is not everybody has that giant pile of money that you both were talking about that can go and implement all the things right away. The one thing that you can consider is there are a ton of financing options and lenders and things like that that will be able to help you if you are looking to go and say, you know what, the risk is not low enough that I can have a 1, 2, 3 year roadmap to go do a lot of these things. I need to do these things now because the 47% of small and medium-sized businesses are going to get hit. 60% are going to go out of business. Like you don't have 3 years, right? And so taking advantage of potential finance opportunities. I know that we have our own programs internally to help with that. We also do like rental type engagements as well, where like firewall as a service or any like hardware as a service where we can potentially rent you the equipment, which one makes that larger expense turn either CapEx into an OpEx expense, or even give you the flexibility where, guess what? You now have those 10 people you want to hire. You're renting that device from us. Let's pull that one back and get you the bigger one that's now appropriate size to be able to perform for the business. So there's a few different things that you can do to help take multiple bites out of the elephant rather than saying I can only do one at a time or try to do the whole thing at once.
And to continue off that, Sal, is one, there's always opportunities to finance, to lease it, and then there's also like Connecticut, ourselves at Westminster. Connecticut is a fantastic state to do business. There's grants available, and we take advantage of it because Connecticut alone really supports manufacturers and small businesses by giving them support to, one, get to Industry 4.0, make sure that their systems are secure, or even improve processes by new technology that allows you to manufacture better. And I strongly, if your business is in Connecticut, looking at reach out to Connecticut Center of Advanced Technology. Ron Angelo, Paul Strebel, Eileen, all of them over there. Not only are they going to help you, but there are great programs out there to help take the weight off of this. And they'll have a matching grant, they'll have other things available. And I know some people are like, oh, I don't know how to write a grant. The team there is outstanding. They will guide you. I have a difficulty trying to explain how IT is, being implemented to write a grant. They have a team there to help you. This money is available to help small businesses because, like you said, Rachel, how many businesses will go under by not making this investment?
Mhm.
The leaders in Connecticut understand that, and they say we need to make sure we're allocating grants to these small businesses to take advantage of. And Jack, I strongly recommend leaving a contact or something, because if you're in Connecticut looking, it's just another option, right?
Yeah.
If your state is supporting you, strongly take advantage of it. And they're an amazing team over there to help you get in. When we're trying to make large improvements, we don't always have, the flexibility to drop a couple $100,000. Well, when the state is supporting you to make those improvements that, again, help me sleep at night, I'll gladly take advantage of every opportunity I have that's available to me.
Awesome. And yeah, I will get that contact info from Colby, and I will send it to all the attendees and the follow-up email tomorrow morning, so you can count on that. But that actually leads right into something that I also wanted to discuss here, and something Sal I know is itching to discuss probably, and that's about how much should small, medium-sized businesses be spending on an IT budget? Like they say that the magic number there is 3 to 6% of a company's revenue. Obviously, that's what?
You stole my thunder.
Yeah.
Oh. But I mean, you can definitely talk about how that differs between like someone with no compliance requirements versus someone who is in a high compliance industry who's has to comply with HIPAA or CMMC or any of those regulatory compliances. So sorry for stealing your percentage and number thunder. I know I feel like I stole yours and Rachel. She was all the stats over here too. So.
No, that's exactly right. I think I was reading an article from like CIO magazine, and they were talking about how the average in 2022 like spend for SMBs, which is like up to $50 million in revenue, was somewhere around 6.9% of their budget tied to IT. IT, cybersecurity, they lump those two things together. I personally think they should be separated when you are looking at your budget, because IT, right, is more of like operational, like keeping things going and working and all of that. The cybersecurity side is really like almost an insurance line, right?
Yeah.
Like it's outside of the typical things that you need for IT and help desk and all of that. But making sure that when you're running through your budget process, like don't let us tell you what number you need to use. Like go look at what you've historically done for the past few years, right? See if you're even in line with those numbers, because think about that. If you're spending if you're spending $1 million, or sorry, if your revenue is $1 million, right? Your small business, $1 million, like 7% of your revenue is a substantial amount of money that you're probably not prepared to spend, right? And so I would be surprised if a lot of organizations were spending that amount of money. And if they are, well, hey, good news is we just potentially saved you some money to tell you to go back and say this is what you should be spending.
Yeah.
But as far as where you're allocating your dollars and things, go back and look at that number. Go figure out like, where are you, right? And then once you have a baseline of where you are as far as dollars, then you can go back and do two things. One, talk to someone like Aram or us at Charles IT too, to figure out like, am I spending the right amount of money, right? Like, is this appropriate, the dollars that I am currently spending? Like, am I being raked over the coals, or am I a small business who may not have the like appropriate purchasing power, where my machines might cost more because I'm buying one at a time rather than working with a provider like Charles IT, who partners with Dell and is able to help pass on, better pricing and savings ourselves. But that would be one of the first things that I would do with that. And then the second part is where Colby was talking about before, about the risk analysis and understanding like where your baseline is. Where do you want to be, right? And so what will it take to get you to where you want to be, where you're comfortable, where you can sleep at night and that type of stuff, right? So when we talk about planning and budgeting for IT, like that is where I would typically suggest most organizations start, because at that point, once you have something in place, if you're an organization that doesn't fall under compliance, I think that 6 to 7% range is probably pretty accurate. But if you're in compliance, it's probably higher, because they're forcing you to be even like, if the standard is here, compliance is forcing you up here, and you need to spend more to be able to do that.
So when I hear that number, I was like, oh, where do we fall in? And we're right on the 4.5%, which makes me happy, right? But I think it's because we've been working through this IT, revamp since 2013. And even before that is we've recognized it. So it's your small bites at a time. But when you look at what you're budgeting for, it should always be part of your CapEx, right? You need to keep replacing these computers because imagine if, like, for us, we have a machine, and if the computer that we have that is writing the programs for that machine goes down, that machine can't work. I need to make sure that that machine has the best processing ability to making sure that we can continue to manufacture to deliver for our customers. But the 3 to 6%, we fall in that range, but it includes a wide, because a lot of that is the software fees we need to pay to making sure we maintain. But I think as before, we went live, Aram and I were talking and we're saying, hey, when's the last time I did a benchmark? I audit through and I make sure that, hey, this is a redundant charge. We got to cancel that subscription or something else. But hey, how can I look at reducing that cost? Because I'm getting 6 different softwares from 6 different vendors rather than working with someone to help consolidate it. And to be honest, the amount of time I would save by having to write 6 checks every single time would also be a time savings and make my life easier. I think when you look at it, though, is we budget for payroll, 30% for payroll. We budget for, the contribution margin for the tools or everything else we're working on. Is I do the same thing with our IT and cybersecurity. Let's separate them and lump them together at the same time. But also that is when you run a budget as percentage of sales, it allows me to confidently say is, hey, Aaron, we are below our sales goals right now. We're falling behind. So, hey, we're going to hold off on making this purchase right now until we recoup some of these sales. And it's a joint effort that allows him to have control to make those decisions. Especially because it takes me so much time to understand what the investment is. When looking at it, we have the roadmap, we know what we're going to be spending, but given that control and knowing you have a plan, if you're ahead of your revenue goal and you're there, maybe it is a time the money should be allocated over to this, right? If you can make that improvement or you can improve those computers, go after it, but I'd be really curious if people audit and actually look at their spend besides their personnel, besides everything they're buying every single year with IT. If you're in the 10-15%, you got to get a grip on it, right? You got to pull it back because what happens when something bad happens, you got to spend more than that, right? You got to make sure you're staying in operations and being proactive, right? Managing it well and making the best decisions you can for your entity.
Yeah, and I hear that, and my initial gut reaction is like, we're all in the business to make money and do that. And for me to be like, if you're spending 10-15%, you got to get a grip on it. And I'm like, no, it's okay. Because at the same time, like, that's another one of those conversations about like, if you're not actively talking to your clients about budgeting and where they are and what they're spending, like, they're going to find out. Like, it's not a surprise. And if I'm an organization and I'm like, I'm 15% of my revenue is tied to IT, like, I know exactly where I'm going to go first to say, I need to consolidate, I need to reduce costs, I need to do something here. And so having that conversation is like one of the most important things you should be doing. And those are conversations that I don't like to shy away from. I'd rather get it out there in the open and just completely be transparent about where you are, because if not, in my world, they're just going to go 6 seconds down the road to the other MSP because there's a million of us in Connecticut, and see what they can do there. So
can I ask a follow-up question? Oh, sorry, Aram. It's only about industries, right? Because you talk about the 3 to 6% in the range there. If you're a software developer, does that budget drastically go up to 30-40%? Is it more specific that you can get down? Like, is there a way that, like, us as a client, we can work with you and say, hey, here's really where we range on it? Because if someone's, I think, giving them a baseline, if you have one stat there and you're someone in manufacturing, if you're in manufacturing, say, hey, you should be around 3 to 5%. And then you're at 15%. That's going to be completely different than a software engineer saying, hey, maybe 15%, maybe it had to be at 40% to really protect our services. I'd be curious, really how much it changes per industry on that point. I'm not sure if you see that as well.
Yeah, no, I would say, like, I've heard a bunch of things here. I would say like that, call it 3 to 6%,
Yeah.
or we're talking about is is an average, right? Like we're talking about like an overall thing for
Yeah.
IT budget, right? And I would say that it's not unfortunately a one size fits all, right? And it's, I think inside of an IT budget, I think it depending upon what type of company it is
Mhm.
and what the vertical is, a lot of that has a depends, right? Like you're saying manufacturing. I also don't think that we have a bunch of manufacturing clients, and I don't think that even in manufacturing in that specific vertical, it's still not a one size fits all,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
so I think working with Charles
Mhm.
and people like me will figure out like what's specifically the right budget number for you.
For you,
right?
yes.
I think that those conversations are unfortunately have to be on an individual basis, working with your account manager at Charles, like in companies like myself, like, and I also think that there's an opportunity not just to talk about an IT budget, and I know that that's why we're here, but also holistically your entire budget. And I heard you say that
Yeah.
a minute ago, right? Like, and I understand that relationships, um, people are stuck in relationships and they're like, hey, we use the same, call it like group life insurance or group health insurance organization we have for the last bunch of years. I would tell you that, one of my closest friends does my auto and home insurance for, my personal stuff, right? And every single year, just because of the nature of my business, like I go back to him and I leverage that relationship to say like, hey, I know that in some, call it specific areas, costs are going down, right? And in other areas, costs are going up, right? So when you're talking about maybe group health insurance, yeah, sure, costs are going up. In property and casualty, costs are kind of going the same, or potentially on a personal lines going down, right? Or the potential to go down because of the competitive markets that we're in, right? You can leverage a relationship with, X vendor versus Y vendor and that kind of thing that might free up. I guess what I'm saying is you might be able to save money in other parts of your P&L
Mhm.
to fund your IT budget, which unfortunately is other than maybe internet charges and getting like, hey, faster speeds for less money and things like that. Like overall, your IT budget is not going to go down, right? It's going to continue to rise as threats rise and security risks and what have you. But there might be another way to look at your overall P&L to save money other places to fund these other IT related projects, right?
To add to that too, like some insurance companies now, so cyber insurance, huge market, everybody's jumping on the bandwagon, right? But the original ones in the game really got tired of paying out these ransoms for companies that were doing absolutely no risk mitigation.
Mhm.
So they've started to put these requirements in place that, hey, you have to have an incident response plan. Hey, you have to have 24/7 monitoring of your environment, stuff like that, right? A lot of these larger companies, they will significantly reduce your premiums if you have invested in security over here,
Yes.
right? So kind of
Yeah.
just another cost saving mechanism.
Yeah, and the funny part is a lot of them now, it might not even be reducing your premium. It's a flat out, you don't have insurance if you don't
Right.
do these things.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
it's progressing so quickly in that
It
way.
is.
But
Mhm.
I agree with Aram here about the planning for your overall business spend and what are the things that you're doing. And our audience today is not specifically talking to just IT people. Like we have other financial executives that are joining us in the discussion today. And one of my biggest recommendations are talk to your peers, get an understanding of the way that they're doing their things. How are they budgeting? What is their spend or percentage based on what are they paying for medical insurance or something like that? And the different benefits that you provide, or even your expense lines of anything. Like, what are you actually spending your money on? And just compare and get ideas, because there's a bunch of different places you can save dollars. And one of the places that you want to spend money right now is in cybersecurity. Like, it is one of the places that if I can shift money from another place to put it there, I'm going to do that over most other things.
And our premiums keep going down the more we improve, right? And it's you look at it, there's always going to be a cause and effect there. And in the budgets, it's a necessity. Line it up, create that roadmap, know where your weaknesses are. And I promise you, not just the insurance, but to mitigate the risk of actually getting hacked, I keep talking about sleep, but the price of sleep is priceless for me. And then the second thing is the struggles. When you have a cyber attack, you're getting away from your operations that are servicing your customers. And when you combine all these together, make a budget, create a roadmap, and truly look to understand. You don't have to be an expert on it, but at least making sure you're spending the correct amount of money and making sure that you're keeping up with the advancements that are happening will help protect you from the cyber risks, will help make sure your company is operating the best way possible, and as well, making sure that you're running your cybersecurity in a proactive way.
I'm gonna cut us off right there for a quick Q&A where we got about 3 minutes left on the webinar timing. So just a couple of quick questions. It did go fast, right? Yeah, this is a fun conversation, honestly. But first one we got here, cybersecurity isn't always a friendly or approachable topic for everyone. How would you recommend going about those crucial conversations related to expanding your company's IT cybersecurity budget with key decision makers who might be tech topic averse?
How would you be open to these conversations?
Being a finance nerd, I go everything with a dollar sign, starting with how much revenue are you at risk to lose? And you have to treat it as a business decision. To get people to buy into anything, you have to explain the why, rather than the what. I'll be honest, I still struggle with understanding what even a lot of these technologies are. But when you come back and you recognize saying, hey, this purchase or this investment will help mitigate these costs right here, or will help us improve our operations in different ways. Always go back to an ROI, and it's hard to really tangibly give a number there, but look at that recovery time. If you start the recovery time and you're saying, hey, that could validate a lot of the purchases and investments you make solely by understanding how much money would you lose if your systems go down for a month, a week, a day, or even an hour, and start going. If you say, hey, you would lose $500,000 on a month, but you'd only lose $5,000 in a week. That's a big change there, and it'd probably sell your point a little better.
Yeah, I think the other, candidly, you talked about it before, but what are some of the things, and what is the efficiency boosts that you can get from a lot of these things, right? So say it is like we're moving to a serverless environment. I no longer need to remote into a machine to be able to do my work on a day-to-day basis. Like, what is that efficiency boost to be able to do that stuff? You talked before about aggregating your vendors together so that you only have to cut one check. Like, what can you do with the other 3 minutes that you just saved on signing those checks? But like, when you start talking about it in that lens, like, it's not just an ROI of like revenue that they'll bring in, but it's what efficiency boost can you get to be able to produce more. And that's the flip side of that. Spot on.
I would say go to have that conversation prepared with things like Colby just mentioned, right? Like, hey, it's not just, hey, I want $5,000 to implement this thing, like it or whatever the number is, and just blindly asking for it. It's more of like, hey, I've noticed that we might have some vulnerability, or we might have a need for this. And if we don't do this, here are the risks associated, and build a business case around it. That will affect the company as a whole, not specific to, it's just IT asking for more money again. Right. Mm-hmm. Like,
and there's a lot of, oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot of, as far as my experience goes, bringing a vulnerability assessment report that's read everywhere, critical vulnerabilities everywhere to your CFO sometimes goes a long way, right? A lot of vulnerability management companies out there offer free proof of concepts where they will do a scan basically on a few of your systems, trying to buy your service, right? They'll do a scan of a few of your systems and they'll give you a report of your vulnerabilities, right? You can turn around and use that report in your business case that you're bringing up to your leadership and say, hey, listen, this isn't some ethereal risk that's out there. We are literally at risk of being attacked. And all of these numbers that I just talked about, our daily revenue loss, our monthly revenue loss, this is a real threat to us, and we need to handle it now.
Yeah, Rachel's point, I mean, some of these scans, just so the audience, and I'm not the most technical guy, but some of the scans are pretty easy, right? Like a lot
Yep.
of them, are asking for like, 24 or 48 hours of like, your IP, inbound and outbound traffic, things like that, like just to scan the network, right? And it's really not a huge lift. That is really my point to
Mhm.
adding on to that. It's not a huge like endeavor. Hey, we don't need 3 weeks and and we want to be in your office poking around in all of your machines and whatever to do this scan, right? Like it just, so I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, awesome, guys. Thank you. We hope that helps you have that crucial conversation there. So we're gonna have to cut it off there. We're 2 minutes over now, but I just wanted to say thank you guys to the attendees, everyone for taking time out of your day to join us today. And then more importantly to you guys, all of our speakers here, Sal, Colby, Aram, and Rachel. Thanks for joining remotely. Unfortunately, couldn't be here, but we're happy to see your face the whole time at least. And also I wanted to say thank you for your service in the Marines as well. So we appreciate your time. We appreciate that. And we appreciate all you guys. So I'm going to send out a follow-up email tomorrow to all the attendees with the recording of the webinar and then the contact information that Colby was mentioning for those located in Connecticut. I'll include some contact info for everyone who was on this panel today as well, as long as it's cool with all of you guys, if anyone has any direct questions for you guys. And then, yeah, that should about do it. So we appreciate the time today. Thank you guys.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Cool.
Let's